We often treat extreme self-awareness as the ultimate form of intelligence. The idea that if we can just analyze our own flaws deeply enough, we will eventually find our way out of them. This state is mapped out in the story of Yūnus, trapped in the crushing darkness inside the belly of a whale. Yūnus achieves a critical realization of his mistake, but that awareness alone doesn't change his physical location. A mind simply observing its own darkness is still a mind trapped within it. Without an execution protocol, self-reflection becomes a weight. Simply knowing you are in the dark doesn't generate the light required to move. In systems theory, this is an infinite recursion error. We see a program, the observer, endlessly querying its own logic without ever executing an external action. As this loop of self-diagnosis continues, it fragments the system. The mind begins to loop within its own loops, creating the dense, chaotic knot we recognize as chronic anxiety. Thinking harder about a recursion error only deepens the crash. A software loop cannot fix itself from the inside. It requires the injection of an external interrupt command to break the cycle and reset the system. The ancient command to break this loop is encoded in verse 19:12. Take the book with strength. In this context, strength, or gua, refers to structural integrity. It is an instruction to displace the shifting, subjective internal dialogue with an invariant, objective code that exists outside the self. When the mind anchors to this external architecture, it shifts the system's operating state. You are no longer a passive observer of a crashing program. You are an active node executing a preset command. This installation is urgent because it must be executed at the exact moment the ego begins to fragment under the pressure of its recursive thinking. The shift transfers the burden of survival from the fragile, looping ego onto a structurally sound, invariant instruction set. We can contrast this architecture with the rigid hardware of the ego, symbolized by the mountain. When an intense singular force hits a rigid structure, the mountain fractures and shatters. A mountain cannot process the tension between the blinding light of truth and the crushing gravity of earth. It lacks the internal geometry to hold both simultaneously. The replacement hardware is the tree. This vector diagram shows a central vertical axis managing two opposing vectors of force. Gravity pulls the roots deep into the dark earth, while phototropism draws the branches up into the bright sky. The tree maintains its structural integrity by distributing these opposing mechanical loads through its vertical axis, executing both vectors without splitting in half. To endure the weight of reality and the light of truth, you require an organic flexibility anchored by this unbreakable core. This structural capacity is the actual definition of wisdom. It has nothing to do with accumulating facts or finding a way to avoid suffering. True wisdom is the architectural ability to inhabit life's deepest paradoxes without breaking. In the afterstate, the mind can hold absolute grief and absolute certainty simultaneously as stable, non-conflicting data points. Once this invariant structure is in place, contradiction is no longer a threat to the system. It becomes the kinetic energy that sustains your life. Consciousness evolves from the paralyzed looping point to the rigid, shattered mountain, and finally to the unified vertical axis of the tree. Self-reflection is a diagnostic prerequisite, a way to recognize the loop, but it is never the final destination. Stop trying to think your way out of the darkness and execute the command that installs the invariant structure. The human system functions as a living conduit, the executable structure that